So welcome everyone, and let's get ready. Let's bow our heads a prayer. Father, we thank you, Lord, for your blessings. We thank you for this opportunity to study your word. And as we make sense of the book of Revelation, dear Lord, may we also order our lives and understand your supremacy, and that we will prepare ourselves to be ready for when you come a second time. Bless us and guide us as we read and as we study. So I pray in Jesus' most holy name. Amen. All right, so thank you all. We have a lot to cover today. So let's just get going. It's a revision, so those who join us later will pick up along the way. So as usual, we have our summary table, if you will. I will want to just quickly cover the basic interpretation principles and literary style that we use when we looked at Revelation. We'll talk about the historical timeline. I think it's important just to understand what part of history Revelation is focused on. We'll talk about how the book is laid out. And then we get straight into the main topics and the main themes, if you will. One will be a war with a woman and her remnant. We'll talk about that. I think that is interesting that when you deal with Revelation, you try to start from chapter 1. But I would suggest to anybody, if you really want to get an understanding, start from chapter 12. All right? It gives you a good starting point for what is in both before and after chapter 12. We'll talk about some war stories, some wars that are going on. We'll talk about final events. We'll talk about the victory, and then we'll do our closing. Remember, we still have chapter 22 and parts of chapter 21 to do. We'll start that next week. But I thought now is a good time to just kind of pause, take some revision, and then we get into some quiz. So I know some of you are looking forward to today. All right. So let's just go. Remember again, no surprises here. We are talking 4 methods of prophetic interpretation. Preterism, we said, assumes that everything in the prophecies in Daniel and Revelation happened in the past. Futurism says that everything will happen in the future and nothing is going on now. And I don't know what is the future, if it's like from now or from later on, but it just assumes everything will happen just before Christ comes. Idealism says all of this is not real, and it's really an allegory, a metaphor of good versus evil in the world. Historicism is the one we are landing on, and the one that says some of it has already been fulfilled, some is being fulfilled, and some will be fulfilled in the future. Ranko Stefanovic, in his great book, Revelation Bible Bookshelf, he kind of says that any interpretive method that denies the predictive nature of Revelation does not do justice to the obvious claims of the book. So preterism, which says everything is in the past, and idealism, which says this thing is not real, they get knocked out because they don't recognize that Revelation is having a predictive nature. That leaves with historism and futurism. And we say futurism still doesn't cut it because it doesn't deal with some of the things that were happening in John's day, even the very author of the book, and then things that would happen in the future. It's not all futuristic, all right? So that is just important to appreciate where we are, that we are using historism as our basis for interpreting the book as we go forward. We also recognize that Revelation is not a sealed book. It's an open book. And a matter of fact, one of the great things we discovered when we studied the earlier chapters was that there was a blessing in the salutations, the very beginning from verse 3. There was salutations to the reader, the hearer, and those who keep the words that were written in Revelation. Remember, I told you this picture here is instructive. I told you that because there were no print and press, what they would do is that they would receive the letters from John on in parchment scroll, if you will, and then the receiver, which was most likely one of the elders of the church, they would carry it to the people and they would read it for them so that they could hear what is going on. So there's a natural blessing. Imagine that you're in that crowd and the first thing you hear is that John is saying to you that there is a blessing for the one who is reading as well as the ones who are hearing. And then he goes on to say, well, don't just read and hear, you need to keep, all right? So that is extremely important in understanding the value. I always call it a value proposition of Revelation. There's value to reading the book. One of the other things that the Bible also begins by saying in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, is that it speaks the things which will shortly take place, right? So in John's day, it was around AD 90 to AD 100, he is revealing stuff that he expects to happen soon. This is not uncommon. When we are looking at Paul, for instance, in some of his writings, Paul said he expected the man of sin to show up in his timeline. The disciples always had this view that Jesus would come in their lifetime. Of course, he's going to come a lot later than that. So that's important, because I know some of us, when we read all of this, it sounds real forbearing, and then you see what is happening in the world, earthquakes. We have an earthquake in Haiti today that is really bad. And then we had all this climate change report last week. We had the floods in Germany and in Europe. We have temperature heat wave going on in Italy that they call Lucifer, anticyclone, if you will. That's extremely important. So a lot of things are happening in the world that is suggesting fragility, and it's not suggesting stability and sustainability. And so John is writing in similar vein where he expected Christ to come soon. We have the same expectation, but we are not time setters. So we don't know if it's going to be next 10 years, 30 years, 40 years, I don't know. But we know that certainly from Jesus's timeline and God's timeline, it looks like it's coming soon. So we had a few reasons why we are paying attention to the things that will surely come to pass. Fundamentally, it's about helping us know and preparing and being ready when it comes, so that we won't be caught by surprise. All right, so Revelation is more about helping us prepare and also reminding us. I think one of the biggest important points around Revelation is that Revelation speaks to victory. It's sometimes you think about all of the things that are going to, the climatic events that will take place and the cataclysmic events, and you say, wow, would we survive all of this? And Revelation is assuring us victory. So other than blessing to those who read, other than telling us about the future, Revelation is also clearly about Jesus Christ, right? He is at the center of the book. As a matter of fact, it begins by saying the revelation of Jesus Christ. So John may be writing, but this is Jesus inspiring, speaking, giving his words. You say, well, this is no different to the rest of the Bible. Indeed, Paul told us that holy men spake as they were moved by God, impressed by God. But Revelation is a little bit special in that one gets a sense that the person, the angel who is speaking to John, is Jesus himself. And it is Jesus talking about his role and his mission and what will happen. So it is revealing Jesus. It uses a lot of the Old Testament sanctuary imagery, if you will, throughout the book, so that it reminds us of Jesus' role as a high priest and his role as a deliverer, if you will, of his people. There are a lot of symbols being used in Revelation. And one of the challenges when we go through it is to try to figure out, when are we talking literally versus metaphorically? And we say a lot of times it's based on the context, but in a very general sense, Revelation is drawing very, very significantly from Old Testament writings and Old Testament prophecies and sayings, etc., and events. And it is extrapolating that into modern day events which will take place in the future. All right, so it's important to understand that symbolism is a key part of Revelation, but it is not 100% symbolism. So that with like any other literary comprehension, you have to understand context and settings, and you have to ask yourself, what was happening? What is he talking about? Is there any correlation back to the Old Testament that puts this in a proper context? And therefore you begin to see whether or not he's talking literally versus figuratively. The main theme, of course, in Revelation is the second coming of Jesus Christ. That is why it's a revelation of Jesus Christ, right? So it is telling us he promised he would come. When he was on earth, he told the disciples, I will come in the clouds. When he left and he went up into heaven in that day in the book of Acts, the angels say that he will come in like manner and receive us unto himself. So Revelation is about realizing Jesus' second coming and giving us the manner and some details around how he would come and what will lead up, if you will, the sequence of events that leads to his coming. So that is the main theme. So something is evolving, if you will. We are saying that this is a writing by John, but a writing that is heavily inspired by Jesus Christ himself in a very direct way. John becomes the muse, he becomes the scribe for Jesus. This is almost a sort of dictation. Christ is using John to write what he's impressed upon him very vividly. What is he impressing upon him? He's impressing upon him Christ's second coming and the fact that Jesus had promised he will come, and indeed he will come. Remember, for John, this is particularly relevant because John was one of the disciples of Jesus. He would have seen Jesus crucified. And so for him, getting a vision about Jesus' second coming would be something of joy. But of course, there are complex issues that are raised, which would confuse him for a bit as a first century believer. But nonetheless, it is really speaking to some important things. When we use historism to go through Revelation, we know that the prophecy spans from the time of the prophet down to the end of time. Does it talk about some stuff that happened before? It does, but it's really spanning from John's time to the end of time. That's why for us, this whole concept of historism and preterism kind of came around in the middle centuries, 17th century, 1700s, 1800s, etc. At that time, if you stood at that point, you could say, well, some of this has already happened, some is happening, and some will happen in the future. All right. The important thing to note is that recapitulation is an important principle that is taking place in the book of Revelation. We saw it in Daniel, where Daniel chapter 2 gave us a summary, and then Daniel chapter 7, 8, and 9 gave us an expansive view, and then 10, 11, and even 12 gave us a further expanded view. All right. So repeating stuff, going it over, putting it in a different perspective, showing it in a different view is a normal aspect, if you will, of the book of Revelation. All right. So we've gathered some principles. We are using historism. We are recognizing recapitulation as a normal path. We are understanding that this is a book that is about Jesus Christ, and more importantly, it's about Jesus Christ's role as a high priest. What is he doing in heaven when he went back up to heaven after his crucifixion? So a lot of sanctuary themes dominate the book. And then what is he going to do at the end, which is to come back for us, and what sort of sequence of events are associated with that going forward. We need to then therefore quickly understand the historical timeline. I like to use this particular slide because I like to say if you had Garden of Eden occurring somewhere out here, then we had a significant amount of events since the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve sinning, and you will then have other ancient civilizations. The antediluvians will be those who lived before the flood, and then you had the predominance of the Egyptians and the Assyrians and stuff after the flood. Abraham, the Judges era with Samson and the Philistines, all of that is occurring around this time. David and Goliath and all of this happening around here. And then we get to, so all of this is what I like to call the rule of the Assyrians and the Egyptians. They were kind of the predominant kingdoms of the world at the time. After the flood with Noah and the flood, which we think is real and that really happened. And we then have a period where the Jews are back in their homeland, which is Canaan, but they have become an unfaithful people. They are not following what God wants, and so they are subject, if you will, to invasions by the nations around them, particularly Babylon. And God is using that as a punishment, but as a warning to bring them back. So we then encountered Babylon around 605 BC. They're followed by the Medes and the Persians, Medo-Persia, if you will, that became a real powerful force in the old days. Cyrus the Great was predicted in the book of Isaiah. And then we had Darius the Mede, all that, with Danny Lyons getting uttered during this period. They're followed by Alexander the Great in terms of the Greeks. And then we had Rome. Rome is an interesting nation because Rome started in the BC period. Rome really started long before this. Rome started all around 700 BC. Rome existed. But as a world beater and a world nation, it's really around 168 BC. You had Julius Caesar, and you had the rise of some of those emperors who became powerful. Rome was a mixture, if you will, of democracy, quote unquote, versus authoritarianism and monarchies, which were the emperors. All right. So that would have spanned a period of including when Christ was born, and then continuing beyond that in the AD period. All right, um, so we use AD and BC to talk about, right? Before Christ and after Christ. So Rome continued after Christ, and then we had important things as the growth of Christianity after Jesus was crucified. Stephen was stoned, Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. You had the birth of Christianity as a nation, separate and distinct, as a religion, separate and distinct from Judaism, which was the traditional Jewish belief and system, right? So Christianity grew. Christianity went through different forms of persecution along the way, but eventually the Romans, who were still the predominant force, would have accepted Christianity as their national religion, even as Constantine also attempted to bring in other religious beliefs that were predominant around that time, and he used something we now refer to as syncretism, just basically to syncretize, bring in, if you will, the beliefs of others into some of the beliefs of the Christian church. And that pollution of the pure gospel is also something that led to what we call the Dark Ages period. The Dark Ages period is an interesting period. It began in 538 AD. It's a period where civil Rome, or Rome as we know it as a nation, is in its demise. It's being decimated by the barbarian tribes around them. And by 476, Rome is a shadow of herself on the on the on the um on the western side, right? On the eastern side, however, with Turkey and Constantinople, etc., Rome is still very prominent, and they have an emperor there called Justinian, who knows that he cannot control the east, the western side. So he then says to the church, look, you take over. The Bishop of Rome becomes the head of the church as well as the nation, and he has real powers. And during that period, the church goes through a period of purging, where they basically get rid of all those who are not believing in themselves. And that continued for a phenomenal period of time, known as 1,260 years, that ended around 1798. And then we used the 2300 years prophecy, and we knew that in 1844 we had a great disappointment with the Millerite movement, when they thought Christ was coming, but really Jesus was moving from the holy to the most holy place in the heavenly kingdom. And I put 2020 here at the time. Of course, we can say 2021. It will all be from, this is a very calibrated number line. So you begin to get a relative sense of how much time has passed. A whole lot of time has passed here, and then we are at the point where we are heading towards the end of time, right? The important thing to note to all that is that the book of Revelation, while Daniel covered a lot of this period here, up to Rome, Revelation goes beyond Rome. That's why they are seen as a pair, and they must be studied together. Goes beyond Rome and presents the early Christian church, the dramas that went through, and then goes all the way to when Christ comes, right? Jesus comes. So Revelation is really covering this period here. This is shown on the maps, just another form, if you will, while we talk about Babylon and Media Persia and Rome, going from a civil country to a religious, political country, if you will. It's important to understand what happens to the believers of God during this period, right? So during Babylon, as well as in captivity, under the Medes and Persian, they experienced some kind of liberation and return from exile. Certainly by the time you get to the Greeks, Israel have returned to their homeland in Canaan, and they're trying to rebuild, etc. It's not perfect, but it's kind of there. And then by the time we get to the Romans, the Israelites are in captivity again. They are now a colony of Rome. Caesar Augustus rules the world when Jesus was born. You have a governor looking after Israel, Pontius Pilate, etc. So all of that takes place. And then we get into the Dark Ages period, where the true Christian believers are persecuted because they don't want to go along with what the church is doing. And this is when we had Martin Luther and all of that arising, right? So during the Dark Ages period, the church is going through some drama, but then the French Revolution comes and the church is liberated. Around the time of the French Revolution, you also have, around that same time, improvement in technology, and the printing press comes into being. So you start to print papers and pamphlets and tracts, and the word is really spreading now by paper and by printed press. All right, around that time, of course, 1776, American independence, they're becoming a powerful nation, and they're gravitating towards becoming a world power. So they're becoming a superpower, if you will. And the church, the church that suffered during the French Revolution when the Pope was captured, the church is experiencing a little bit of resurgence. And it gets to the point where in our lifetime, just a few years ago, we saw the head of the church addressing the joint heads of Congress, which was a unique arrangement, if you will, because America was seen as a sort of Protestant nation that fled from the persecution of the church in Europe during the Dark Ages period, and therefore had no alliance or no reverence, if you will, for the church in its traditional form. That is even further emphasized when recently, well, I say recent, but recent as in maybe the 90s, we saw when Pope John Paul died, we saw three presidents at his graveside, right? So that just kind of gives you a sense that the church is clearly on an upward resurgence since its apparent death during the French Revolution. All right. Revelation then went on to tell us that in the future we will have a rekindling of church and state coming together, similar to what happened in AD 538, but this time it won't be a single entity who has both civil and religious power. It will be separate religious powers uniting with separate civil powers to create a union, common enemy, if you will, that will seek to impose worship standards upon the world, etc. And that is referred to as the image of the beast, because the beast was seen as the church during the Dark Ages period. During all that time, God is still trying to save his people, and he's still sealing them with his character, and he's still offering his ministrations in the heavenly kingdom and asking God for forgiveness for all of us, etc. But at some time that comes to an end, and when that comes to an end, he's ready to come again, but he ushers in a period of plagues, which will come. We've talked about 7 of them. And then that, just as it looks as if the true believers of God will be extinguished by persecuting forces, Jesus comes and he saves them. Everybody okay so far? So we've covered 2 of our main points. I mean, moving along, right? So we have the biblical principles to understand Revelation. We have a historical timeline. Let's talk about how the book is separated. Well, this one is pretty straightforward. We have done this before. The book has a prologue. You see Jesus walking among the 7 golden candlesticks and stuff. And then we have an epilogue, which is where we will start to study next week, when we talk about the heaven and what it looks like and what will happen up there. And in between that, we have an example or details of how the controversy between heaven and Satan and Christ and Satan, how it is manifested upon the earth during the period up until the very end of time, which is when last the events really kick in, right? So that is what we talk about in the 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and then it's even in further glaring detail in Revelation chapters 12, 13, and 14, right? So that is kind of the cosmic conflict, which we studied in Daniel, and we come back and meet again. And then as things come to an end, we start to talk about the specific sequence of events that lead to Jesus coming a second time. This is when we cover the millennium, the 1,000-year period, and then we cover the fact that Christ actually comes in the clouds of glory. All right, so that is kind of where we are at and how the book is laid out. Where we are at right now is that we are somewhere here in terms of our study, and we need to conclude that with the epilogue to see we bring all of this to an end. All right. So, having understood how the book is laid out, having understood the historical context, let's go through some of the main themes and topics that are presented. The first one is to recognize that a cosmic struggle for control of the universe is occurring and is happening. And it started in heaven. It started in heaven with a battle for the throne. So while the Old Testament Isaiah told us about Lucifer said in his heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, and I will be like the Most High, a rebellion in heaven. Revelation gives us a little bit more detail and tells us that a war broke out in heaven between Michael and his angels who fought with the dragon, meaning Lucifer, and his angels fought. And the dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil, no ambiguity there, No sense of metaphorical. This is literal conversation now. Who deceives the whole world, and he was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast with him. So we get a sense, if you will, that there is this huge cosmic controversy that started long before earth came into existence, and that one of the consequences of that was that the devil was expelled from heaven, and he found himself upon a desolate earth, which God will later turn into creation, Adam and Eve, all right? And he would attempt to get after Adam and Eve. Don't try to work out timelines. We're not given that kind of detail to say, well, it was 5,000 years before Earth became the Garden of Eden, or it was a year before, or 2 minutes before. We don't have that detail. We just simply recognize that there is a war in heaven that predates the creation of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, and that the devil was cast out. His final resting place is this earth that we are part of. But in the earlier days, he had the luxury of moving in and out. But by the time Christ was crucified, he was basically confined to this earth and waiting on his final judgment. All right? So upon his expulsion from heaven, Satan spread his rebellion to our earth. Tragically, the seeds of controversy that began in heaven took root on planet Earth. So we know about Adam and Eve. We know about the promise in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, when he promised to bruise his head, and he shall to destroy his head, and he shall bruise his heel, etc. So that is kind of where we at. So Revelation describes an enormous, Revelation 12 anyway, describes an enormous struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So if you were to ask me, where would I start if I'm reading Revelation? I like chapter 12, which is really counterintuitive, because you would say, well, I'll start from chapter 1. In Daniel, certainly you want to start from chapter 1. But in Revelation, when you start in chapter 12, you have a sense of this whole controversy that's taking place between God and Lucifer that started in heaven, and that it will finish in its final throes, if you will, of the battle upon the earth. All right, so earth is the theater of the conflict that is occurring between Christ and Lucifer. So when we looked at Revelation chapter 12, we talked about Satan wanted to destroy Christ when he was upon the earth. We saw that with the Romans wanted to destroy the firstborn child, and Mary and Joseph having to flee. And then we talk about his expulsion from heaven, which was the beginning scene. And then the last efforts we talked about was Satan having failed to destroy Christ while he's upon the earth. Even with a crucifixion, Christ was resurrected. He then turns his focus upon the church, which is referred to as a woman, and he goes particularly after the remnant of her seed, which is a last day church towards the end of time, and all these sequence of events are taking place. Right? So one of the things that we kept in our head is that Revelation 12 completed its narrative with verse 17, which says the dragon was wrought with a woman. Before that, we were understanding that he knew he didn't have much time. And so knowing that he doesn't have much time, he is wrought. Why he doesn't have much time? Because once Christ died upon the cross, that is the end of him, right? So again, we are in Revelation telling us about this great controversy and how this war is evolving. What do I do that? Making good time. Okay, let's keep going. So let's talk the war stories. If we go back to our timeline, we said that this period here is what Revelation is focused on, right? The period from when Christ has died and been crucified on the cross, but the church has been formed, if you will, is led by the disciples who followed, and then by one Paul, who was further before Saul, who becomes a real proponent of Christianity after he was a persecutor. And he carries the church with fervor all over parts of Europe, using the great roadway network that the Romans had established, etc. By AD 70, Jerusalem is destroyed, and the Christian church is scattered throughout the known world. It's no longer just concentrated in Jerusalem and in Israel, but it's scattered all over Asia, Asia Minor, and goes to far areas like the Americas and stuff, right? So the message is really spreading. But during this time, there are some battles that are taking place with the Christian church and the Roman Empire. And that is what forms part of the big wars. But it all leads towards when Christ comes the second time. So in reviewing that, we reviewed what I like to refer to as the three panoramas, three periods of history that may look separate, but is really the same period. And in one case, we looked at it from the lens of, or using the imagery of seven churches. Another time, we looked at the same period. So even though I put three panoramas here, notice I put in quotes because I want you to appreciate it is not three different time periods. It's the same time period, but looked at in three different ways, right? So we have the seven churches, which really talks about the evolution of the Christian church over time and how the church evolves and takes on different characteristics over time. So during the Dark Ages period, when the church was persecuting people, it's the Thyatira period, for instance. And that the Laodicean period is a period of lukewarmness, cynicism, people not really being enthusiastic about church, you're neither hot nor cold, is the period that is represented by Laodicean church, right? Which is the last day church. And then we got to the seven seals, which talked about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and then told us about rocks and mountains falling upon people, silence in heaven, etc. That too covered the same period, but it looked at it from the perspective of the persecution that the church would go through and the attack by external forces, etc. Trumpets had a similar theme, if you will, and a sequence, and it also covered that period. What is that period? Well, when you looked at it in one of these, you had the period between until the death of John, which was around AD 100. You had the period with Constantine's conversion, which occurred around 313 AD and up to when he died in 323. And then between there was a period where Rome is decaying, it's being overrun by the barbarians, but eventually you have the power given to the church to become both political as well as religious. And then you have the Martin Luther Reformation that occurs in 1517. We celebrated 500 years of the Reformation in 2017. So this is an important period where the church is continuing to grow with its synchronism and having mixture of beliefs in the church, but they are pure people, purists, if you will, who remain focused on what the Bible says. And one of them is Martin Luther, who famously placed his 95 Theses upon the doors of the Church of Wittenberg, Germany, in protest to the direction in which the church was going. All right. And then we have this saddest period where the church is really like stagnant water. It's not doing a lot, and it's just holding steady and destroying people and running crusades, etc. But in 1790, the French Revolution comes, the church is imprisoned, if you will, through its leadership. And there's a period of brotherly love, there's a growth of Protestantism, everything looks nice and dandy. It's interesting to know that William Miller was a Baptist preacher in the sense of a Protestant who would have focused a lot on Christ's second coming in 1844 and led to a resurgence in the focus on Christ and his second coming, etc. After which, by 1863, after that happened in 1844, the Adventist Church was formed. All right, so I was kind of understanding that, and then from then on to now we are in what we call the Laodicean period. I mean, not just talking about any particular religion, but we're just talking about the Christian world as a whole going through a sense of apathy. All right, so same kind of thing. But what we noted is that when we looked at the sequence in the seals as well as the trumpets, they all followed a sort of sanctuary theme. But between the sixth and the seventh seal, there was an interlude period where we talked about the 144,000 and the great multitude in heaven. And then between the sixth and the seventh trumpet, similarly, after we talked about the French Revolution here and the abyss and people coming up, etc., we had an interlude that we talked about people in heaven and going through periods of victory, etc. And then we came back, if you will, to the trumpet, the seventh trumpet, right? And we talked about all the other things there. So we've always had the 144,000 who is able to stand. This is what the seven seals look like. And then the interlude in the seven trumpets was around the Bible being preserved in Revelation chapters 10 and 11, and the Advent movement begins by spreading the everlasting gospel. The Adventist Church finds a lot of resonance in chapter 11, which is when we are told to preach again, because we think that we are following that command by preaching God's everlasting gospel again. Between that and Revelation 14, the three angels' message, the Adventist Church has a lot to find alignment with in terms of our origins and how we go forward. All right. So in Revelation 10 and 11, we talked a lot about the church prophesying again, and we talked about a little book that would be sweet in the mouth and then later on sour, because when they thought Christ would come, there was joy and overcoming, but when there was disappointment, it became a bitter experience. But coming out of that, we were told to preach again, and so the message went to all the world after 1844. All right, so that is the war stories period, really cover the Dark Ages period. I cover the things that will be going wrong during the Dark Ages in particular. But I don't want you to get fooled. While this period covers the Dark Ages, it also spans these three panoramas. They also span all the way to when Christ comes the second time. All right, so let's not forget that. It gives us some insight into Christ coming the second time, but a lot of it is focused between 80, 100, and 1798, 1844. All right, but the rest of the details around the end of time is something that will come later on, which is where we headed when we cross the median of chapter 12 and we went into chapters 13, 14, and beyond, right? So the final events, which I like to call the end game. No, any resemblance, anything else, is purely coincidental. But it's the end game, right? So Revelation 12 told us about the main conflict which we talked about and introduced the big players, Jesus, Michael. Whenever Jesus is referred to as Michael, we're talking about him in his commander role. And then we introduced the dragon, which is the devil. We are told he had his angels with him, about a third of the angels in heaven. We are told that he lost the battle when Christ died upon the cross. We are told he doesn't have a lot of time and he uses his short time to go after the church. How does he go after the church? Well, he uses worldly powers as well as a resurgence of the Christian church. That is what Revelation 13 is about. Revelation 13 says, well, for him to get that, to go after the Christian church who he has made war with, and he wants to go after the remnant of a seed, he will ensure the resurgence of the traditional Christian church, which is the Roman Catholic Church, will become a power all over again. We are seeing that today. And that he will also see an alignment between the kings of the world and the church. Now, many years ago, that looked like that was just crazy and that could never happen. Now, given what I told you about the head of the church addressing joint heads of Congress and stuff in the US, and that the US is a lot more sympathetic. Currently, the US has a Catholic president by religion, which was something that would have been frowned on in the past, but nobody make any noise about that today. There's a kind of acceptance, if you will, of the roles of the church and the roles of the state. And what Revelation 13 said to us is that towards the end, they would come together, if you will, in a united front that would be very much against God and what he believes and what he stands for and the purity of the gospel in the last days, to the extent that those who follow that union of church and state will be deemed to have been following the mark of that institution and that entity, that beast entity, if you will, and they would impose not just physical sanctions and penalties, but they will also impose economic sanctions, neither buy nor sell, right? Those are in their head or in their hands, etc. During that time, however, God is saying, don't just sit and become prophecy watchers and just trying to see what is happening, but you must preach the everlasting gospel. Spread the word, let people know that a judgment has started already in heaven through the investigative judgment 1844. Let them know Christ is coming. Call out those who are in Babylon and tell them to join into the message. They use the word Babylon again to refer to this new arrangement that will pop up, that will seek to hold God's people under subjection. And then we got into the plague period, and we got the timing of the plagues, as when we were told that this is happening when Jesus finishes his heavenly ministry. And that's when the plagues would start. And we got some details around the plagues. We told the first 5 were about the physical earth environment, and that the last 2 were really about the battle with this union of church and state and whether it will have support. We were told about the three frogs and that the union of church and state will um, seek to create a counterfeit representation of Jesus' second coming. There was a very strange reference in Revelation chapter 16 when we were going through the sixth plague. There was a stop in between there, parenthetical reference to the fact that Jesus said, I will come in the clouds and every eye shall see me, right? So he's trying to say to us, hey, there will be some kind of attempt to replicate my coming, but I told you how I will come. It would be big, it would be everybody know, etc. And then we are introduced to the final battles towards the end. We started to talk about Armageddon and all that kind of thing, right? So we'll talk about all those battles. It looks as if God's people would be destroyed towards the end, but at the end of the day, God's people will be delivered. How will they be delivered? They will be delivered when Christ comes a second time. All right, so he will burst the clouds of glory. So, you're doing a lot better than I expected. I know I'm going a bit fast, but I hope you guys are not, you're appreciating that this is a review. My intent in this class is really to provide you with the big picture items. Some cases we magnify and get into the details, but it's really to give you an overview of Revelation. And then as you review it on your own and you have the tools of the trade, you know how to interpret, you understand the historical context, you can reference going into some of the online resources and look at some of the historical events that correlate. You could read the commentaries by others. You could read Ellen White, who did a very good job in the book Great Controversy. And then as you read those things and you see how it makes sense, you can always come back to the YouTube videos and look for the specific areas we have discussed as we went along. So we have looked at after we talked about how the book is constructed, we said that the main thing around the book is to tell us that the cosmic conflict started in heaven, it will end on earth, and that before it ends, there will be some battles that will be going on between Christ and Satan, where the church is going to be the subject of that battle through the Dark Ages period and then towards the end. And then it gives us a final sequence of events, which again centers around wanting to persecute and destroy and extinguish the true followers of Jesus Christ, a remnant of the seed of the woman. So this concept of the battle between the devil and the church is a reoccurring battle in the book of Revelation, concept in the book of Revelation, and the one that we need to pay attention. If you keep that in your head, then everything kind of makes sense as we go forward. And then lastly, we are told that we will experience a sequence of events when Christ will come. He will come in the clouds. The faithful, both the faithful who are alive as well as those who are dead, will return with him to heaven. They will spend a 1,000-year period with Christ in heaven. During that period, they will, of course, be doing another phase of the judgment where they will be reviewing the faith of those who have decided not to follow Jesus Christ and be unfaithful. It's a judgment phase, if you will. But they are in heaven. They're enjoying a good time in heaven. They have realized John 14, 1 to 3. Where I am, there you may be also. In my Father's house are many mansions. But the unfaithful are dead. So they are all dead. Even those who are alive when Christ came, they are all dead. But the devil is alive. And he is upon the earth, desolate, nobody to tempt. He is basically bound and in chains. And just before the saints, those who are faithful, and Christ returns from heaven after the 1,000 years, they are resurrected again and they gather to fight the descendant city with Christ's angels and the faithful believers, right? They will be destroyed. They will not be destroyed forever and ever and ever, continuously, but they'll be destroyed completely. Punto final, and no coming back after that. And then God takes out of the rubble, out of the burnt ashes, will he create a new heaven and a new earth. New heaven in the sense of atmospheric heaven around the earth, and this will now be the new home for mankind, and that the city that God had prepared, that we stayed in when we were in the 1,000-year period, will now reside on earth and God, Jesus, will continue to run the universe with his government placed upon the earth, which is the city of God, which we'll talk a little bit about next week when we get into the end of chapter 21 and chapter 22. All right, so that is the big ticket item there. The fire that destroys the wicked purifies the earth from the pollution of sin. Out of the ruins of this earth, God will bring a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth will be passed away. That's what Revelation 21:1 tells us. And he said there will be no more sea, which is a symbol of separation, no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more murderers, fornicators, idolaters, liars, etc. So all that is gone. And instead we have a new Jerusalem, which is a city. For it to be a city as a capital, it means that there are other parts there. So the whole nation of earth, there'll be a new city called the New Jerusalem. And that people will be have no tears. They will experience the water of life, and there'll be the presence of God with them all the time. God is now united. The marriage supper of the Lamb is taking place. He's now united his people, and they will follow him wherever he goes, because they've been redeemed from among men and from the fruits of God unto the Lamb. Closing thoughts. The fire that destroys the wicked purifies the earth from the pollution of sin. Out of the ruins of this earth, God will bring a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth are passed away. So that is our review, if you will. Maybe I should pause it. Let me go back to the summary page. That is our review, if you will. We've covered what it takes to interpret the Bible. We've looked at the historical timeline. We've talked about how the book is outlined. We've said that the main drama is this battle between Lucifer and the church after Christ has died upon the cross. And that goes through the centuries, including where we are today. And will eventually culminate in some cataclysmic events that will result in final victory, and Christ will come and take us home. Any questions on that, anybody? All okay? All right. Then let's see if we can do some review questions, if you will. I won't call them quiz, because I know some of you, when you hear quiz, you go through a little bit of trauma, right? So let's do some review questions. Some of them I think you have seen before, but I've made some changes, and there are 3 in all. So I think between now and the end, we can get through all of them, and I'll give you a chance to review it. As we go through each question, there are options in which you can answer. You can put on your answers. This is all self-administered. I'm not giving you a certificate for doing this well, or I'm saying you fail or anything like that. This is just to help you jog your memory. And then if there are questions you're not sure about, then certainly we can pick them up. But this will help us, I think, cover a lot of what we just did a while ago. So let's get going. Let's see if we can cover. This is the first one I want to do. So let's take this one, right? So it says here, Revelation is written by somebody or something and reveals something else, right? So which is the correct answer? A, Revelation is written by John and reveals the great dragon. Is that the correct answer? B, Revelation is written by John and reveals early Christianity. Is that the correct answer? C, Revelation is written by John and reveals Jesus Christ. Is that the correct answer? And then D, Revelation is written by John and reveals the United States in prophecy. Which is the correct answer? All right, so write down your answers somewhere. We'll come back to them in a bit. We'll cover all of them as we go along, right? Number 2. Who does John see in the first vision of Revelation, and what is a person walking amongst? Adam and Eve in the garden, and they're walking in the Garden of Eden. Is that the correct answer? Is it Nebuchadnezzar on his throne in Babylon? Is it Jesus dying upon a cross of Calvary? Or is it Jesus and the golden candlesticks? Is that what he sees? And does he see the person walking amongst these things? So that is question number 2. What do you add to that? Great. Keep going. Who was the pastor of the 7 churches in Revelation? Remember we talked about the 3 panoramas and the first were the 7 churches, right? Who was the pastor to those 7 churches? Was it, remember those churches were real churches in Asia Minor at the time, eh? So he's using them in a very literal sense to write letters to, but the letters he writes are metaphorical in their language and represents a phase in the world history of the Christian church. So who was the pastor? Was it Constantine? Was it Martin Luther? Was it Peter, the apostle, or was it John? Who was the pastor of the 7 churches in Revelation? Even in those days, they had pastors to the churches. Who was the pastor? Number 4. What are the names of the first and last of the 7 churches? So is it Ephesus and Laodicea? Is it Smyrna and Laodicea? Is it Ephesus and Philadelphia? Is it Ephesus and Pergamon? Which pair here represents the churches, the first and the last of the 7 churches? Again, just seeing how much of this you remember, right? Question 5. The 144,000 are described in Revelation as a group. They are described, not that they happen, but they are described as a group between what? The first and the 4th seal, is that when the description came? Between the 5th and the 6th seal, is that when the description came? Between the 3rd and the 6th seal, is that when the description came? Or between the 4th and the 7th seal, is that when the description came? So you need to think about that. We'll come back to that in a bit. Write down your questions, your answers somewhere, and let me know what you. Well, it's up to you. This is I don't. There's no shame in anything here, right? You just use that on your own vibes to figure out. How many beings did John see before God showed in heaven? Remember in Revelation 4 and 5, John actually sees heaven open and the thrones of heaven, and he sees some beings in heaven. Did he see 7 beasts and 24 elders? Did he see 24 beasts and 7 elders? Did he see 1,000 angels and 24 angels? Did he see 4 beasts and 24 elders? You have to figure out which one is correct. That is, of course, Revelation chapters 4 and 5, which is a very literal chapter where John looks into heaven. So, what are the 3 panoramas in the first part of Revelation? And of course, when we say the first part, we mean from chapters 1 to 14, right? Or 12 even, the first part. What are the 3 panoramas? Are they the 7 golden candlesticks, the 7 stars and the 7 clouds? Or B, are they 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets? C, are they 7 trumpets, 7 plagues, and a millennium? Or is it D, the 144,000, the great multitude, and the plagues? Are they the 3 panoramas, the 3 event periods that cover some period of time? All right. So that is what we're asking. Number 8. When we dealt with the 7 trumpets, which trumpet described the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70? Remember, Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. The Romans came in and destroyed the city, etc. Which trumpet talked about that? Or at least represented those events in its imagery? Was it this A, the 7th trumpet, B, the 5th trumpet, C, the 3rd trumpet, or D, the 1st trumpet? So you have to think about that, taxing your brains to see if you remember, right? Which 2 of the 3 panoramas include an interlude scene? There's an interlude scene in at least between some events in 2 of the panoramas that we've been studying. Is it the 7 churches and the 7 trumpets? Is it the 7 seals and the 7 churches? Is it the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets? Or is it all 3 had an interlude in there somewhere? You need to answer that for me. And then the 10th one says, in both the visions of the seal and the trumpets, which number in the sequence refers to the second coming of Jesus? So we had the visions of the seven seals, we had the vision of the seven trumpets. Which one of those seals or trumpets, which number was referring to events around the second coming of Jesus Christ? The third seal and the third trumpet, the fifth seal and the seventh trumpet, the seventh seal and the first trumpet, the seventh seal and the seventh trumpet, or none of the above. All right? Great. So let's go through some answers for these now, if you have your stuff written down. So let's go. The first question was, Revelation is written by somebody and reveals somebody, and the answer for that is John and Jesus Christ. It is written by John, I told you that just now, and it reveals Jesus Christ, right? That's why you had two dashes here to kind of give you a hint. All right, it certainly talks about United States and prophecy, but that's not the main thing. John is really revealing Jesus Christ because it starts off by saying the revelation of Jesus Christ, right? So that is what that one is. Question 2, who does John see in the first vision of Revelation? And what is the person walking amongst? He saw Jesus. Remember that vision of Jesus, golden hair and bronze feet and eyes like fire, etc. And he was walking among the golden candlesticks, which is a sanctuary theme that is repeated over and over again. So I hope you guys got that correct. Who was a pastor to the seven churches? That one is easy. Constantine wasn't a pastor. Martin Luther was a priest. Peter was a pastor, yes, but the real pastor for the seven churches was John. Remember, John was the only apostle who was alive by the time he got to Revelation, and he actually pastored those seven churches in Asia Minor. So that's why when he wrote Revelation chapter 2 and stuff, he begins by saying, John to the church at Ephesus, John to the church at Philadelphia, because he's writing as a pastor who is doing some help to his parish, if you will. What are the names of the first and the last of the seven churches? Well, that one is easy. It's Ephesus and Laodicea. All right, so I hope all of us got that one correct. Ephesus was the first church, Laodicea is the last church in that sequence. The 144,000 were described in Revelation as a group that occurred, maybe that question I could write it a little bit differently, but I really want to know when was it described. It was described between the sixth and the seventh seal. Remember, between the sixth seal, there was a question that came at the end and say, who shall be able to stand? And then Revelation chapter 7 gave us a long explanation about the 144,000. And then Revelation chapter 8, verse 1 told us about the seventh seal. So the description of the 144,000 came as a description in the Bible between the sixth and the seventh seal. So again, I hope all of you got that correct. How many beings did John see before God's throne in heaven in Revelation chapter 4 and 5? He saw 4 beasts and 24 elders. The 4 beasts remind us of a description we saw in Ezekiel when he also saw the cherubims and Isaiah talking about where they had two cover their face with 6 wings, etc. Reminds us of that. And the 24 elders are representative, if you will, of beings that sit about the throne in God's throne room and government. And we talked about them being representative of fallen and fallen worlds, etc. No specific conclusion around that, but we talked about the fact that he saw those people existing, right? What are the 3 panoramas in the first part of Revelation? Well, I hope you remember that we talked about 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets. 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, right? And we just said that the only 2 that had an interlude were the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. Which trumpet described the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 by the Romans? That was obviously the first trumpet. That's the one that talked about 1/3 of the earth being destroyed and that kind of stuff. And blood and the tree being cut down, because we know that Jerusalem and Israel was referred to by a tree in the Old Testament times. All right. Which 2 of the 3 panoramas includes an interlude scene? And we talked about, I think I was answering that one before. And that's the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. They had an interlude scene, each of them, right? And then in number 10, in both the visions of the seal and the trumpets, which one represented the second coming of Christ? In both cases, it was the seventh seal and the seven trumpets, right? So I think we all got those correct as we go forward. All right. So that's great. I hope you all enjoy that. We have two more to go. So let's keep going. Today is quiz day. So we get any rest of them out of the way. I know some of you are wondering how I could forget this or forget that, but I hope a lot of you remember at the same time, right? So let's pick up the other one I want to do it today. Yes, this one. So we're going to the second quiz now. Let me just bring it up on the screen. Sharpen your pencils. Let's go, right? So we're into quiz number 2. In quiz number 2, the first question says, just get that moving, right? The woman in Revelation 12, remember we discovered a woman in Revelation 12. She's clothed with the something and she's standing on something. Is she clothed with the stars and sign on the moon? Is she clothed with the sun and sign on the moon? Is she clothed with the sun, S-O-N, and sign on the moon? Is she clothed with the sun and sign on the stars? Is she clothed with the sun and sign upon the earth? If you're confused, then you just need to remember what the text said, right? So this is Revelation chapter 12. When Revelation chapter 12 opened, we saw a woman clothed in white. She was standing upon something. Was it the stars and the moon? Was she clothed in the sun and the moon? Was she clothed in and sign on the moon? Was she clothed in the S-O-N and sign on the moon? Was she clothed in the sun and sign on the stars? Was she clothed in the sun and sign upon the earth? All right, so that's the first question. Same approach, we'll go through all the questions and come back to the answers. The other one says, if I could just get it to move along. All right, so let's go to the second one. What happened to the child of the woman in Revelation 12? She, the child, grew up into a woman herself and had many children. Is that the correct answer? It was devoured by the dragon. C, it grew into the Roman church. D, he was born, ruled all nations, and was caught up into heaven. E, he died at birth. F, he drowned in a flood that swept away the woman. Which is the correct answer? What happened to the child? The woman in Revelation is seen as pregnant with a child and she brings forth her child. And then the write-up says what happened to the child. So you have to tell me what happened to the child and which of these answers best describes what happened to the child. Every now and again, I will let you know that sometimes more than one answer may be correct, but you will have to figure that out. And we'll come to that when we do the answers. It's not often, but every now and again. At the end of Revelation 12, the dragon begins an intense attack on whom? Is it the Roman church? The end of Revelation 12, Revelation 12:17, says the dragon was wroth and went to make war. So we want to know who he makes war with, right? Is it the Roman church? Is it the descendants of Martin Luther? Is it the 144,000? Is it the last church of God referred to as a remnant of the woman? Is it the land beast? Is it those last day believers who keep the commandments of God and are blessed with the spiritual gift of prophecy? So you have to tell me what is the correct answers to this one, right? The dragon symbolized in Revelation 12 refers to whom? Babylon? Rome? The devil and civil Rome? Religious Rome? Or Medo-Persia? You have to tell me who it refers to, right? So I'm looking forward to you telling me which one that is. Number 5. The beast arising from the sea in Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13 gave us a view of two creatures, one coming out of the sea and one coming out of the land. The one coming out of the land had 2 horns and then spoke like a dragon. The one that came out of the sea basically continued to be just being a beast and giving trouble, right? So the beast rising out of the sea in Revelation 13 refers to whom? Is it China? Is it Jurassic Park? Is it Daniel? Is it the Roman Empire? Is it the Roman Church as a later version of the Roman Empire? Or was it Christopher Columbus? All right, so gotta tell me which one you think best represents what you remembered from what we covered. I hope you guys get all these things right in me, because if I see answers that are otherwise, I'll get worried. All right? But it's a good thing I'm not going to see it anyway. Right? It's totally up to you to figure out. Number 6. The beast springing up out of the land refers to whom or to what? Was it Martin Luther and the Protestantism in 1517 when he provided his thesis on the walls? Was it referring to the Media-Persia Empire when we talk about a beast coming out of the land? Was it the Advent movement of the 1840s? Was it the United States of America? Or was it referring to the French Revolution? The beast coming out of this land, what is that referring to? Who is it referring to whom? We need to get that clear in our heads. Number 7, the description had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, which is used to describe the beast in Revelation 13 coming out of the land. It says he had 2 horns like a lamb and he spoke like a dragon. Refers to civil Rome and religious political Rome. John as a disciple of Jesus and then later as a prophet to the church. The Christ-like nature of the United States and its founding principles, but it should really say it demonstrated tendency to sanction and isolate sections of the community and later the true believers. Atheism and secularism during the French Revolution, is that the 2 horns? The Roman Church, which officially teaches worship to God, but also practices belief that are not based on the Bible. What is referred to as the 2 horns in the beast here, like a lamb in Revelation? All right, the mark of the beast, which is referred to in Revelation chapter 13, is the mark of the beast. I should have put Corona here, but I know you by now you know that is not what it is, right? Is it the lion and the coat of arms of a nation? Is it a 666 statue that we place on the head of the followers of the devil? Is it an electronic identity chip that will be inserted in all people on the earth? Is it a machine-readable passport? Is it the observance of a religious day of rest and worship that is different from the 7-day Sabbath of the Bible, but promoted and enforced by a system of government and religion that is based more on the teachings of man than the Bible? Is it a system of government that does not recognize God? What is referred to, what have we inferred is the mark of the beast when we did Revelation chapter 13? What have we concluded? Which one of these represents the best answer for us? All right, Revelation chapter question 9. Revelation chapter 13 indicates that the something will regain worldwide prominence in the years in up to Christ's second coming. So Revelation 13 indicates that some entity will regain a worldwide prominence in the years in up to the second coming of Christ. Is that entity the Babylonian Empire? Will Babylon regain its prominence towards the end? Is that entity China? Is that entity the United States of America? Is that entity Italy, who is today modern day Rome? Is that entity the Roman Catholic Church led by the papacy? Or is that entity Islam? What is the entity that will regain worldwide prominence leading up to the second coming of Jesus Christ, according to Revelation chapter 13? All right, and then last question. The 144,000 represents the great multitude. It represents, because remember in Revelation 14, that 144,000 return as a concept, right? China as a nation rising from the east at the end of time, that is what represents by the 144,000. China is becoming very popular now and very powerful. All the Jews who are still alive today, Jesuit priests, is that who's represented by 144,000? Believers of God and the Bible who will choose to worship God according to the Bible rather than any law that mandates otherwise. And then the fifth one says, true believers who will be victorious during a very intense period of forced worship towards the end of time. So that's the 10th question, right? You're doing good. So I hope your pieces of scrap paper are filled with answers. Let's take on the answers now. So we start back with question 1. The woman in Revelation 12 is clothed with the sun and she's standing on the moon. But you okay with that? The stars were in her crown and her head. So we can't have stars as anything there. She's clothed with the sun, which was the sun of righteousness. And then she's standing upon the moon, the reflected light, which is representing the word of God. So the sun represents Jesus Christ. The moon, which is reflected light, represents the word of God, which reflects Jesus Christ. Everybody remember that? All right. The second one was what happened to the child of the woman in Revelation 12? Well, the child of the woman was Jesus Christ. He was born. He ruled all nations because, they put up the signs and he was the king of the Jews, etc. And then he was caught up into heaven. That's the best answer. All right. So I trust all of you got that one correct. The third one says at the end of Revelation 12, the dragon begins an intense attack on the last day believers who keep the commandments of God and are blessed with the spiritual gift of prophecy. All right. Now, if you had D as well, that's okay. Because I normally I told you that some of these questions may have more than one answer. So if you had D, which is the last day church of God, referred to as a remnant of the woman, that is also correct. All right. So I just didn't put the circle around it when I did up the presentation. The dragon symbol in Revelation 12 refers to the devil and civil Rome. Now, that's an important construct, because while we say the devil, of course, which was what we referred to, at some point we said that the dragon went after the child of the woman and sought to devour the child. Who tried to kill Jesus when he was upon the earth? It was the nation of Rome. It wasn't a real dragon that appeared with 7 heads and red and trying to kill the child. It was the nation, the Roman nation through the emperor, trying to kill the child who was carrying out the wishes of the devil. So when Revelation 12 uses the term dragon, it is using it primarily to refer to the devil, but it is also referencing the agent of the devil in that context, which is, of course, the nation of Rome at the time. It's interesting that the devil will continue to use Rome in its other incarnation, in its religious political form, to also carry out his bidding, which happened in the Dark Ages period, and which we are proffering will happen towards the end of time, right? So that's number 4. The beast rising from the sea in Revelation 13 refers to the Roman Church as a later version of the Roman Empire. All right, so this is religious political Rome coming up again. The Roman Empire in its proper form is dead since 476 AD, but the church is coming out of the sea, a place of plenty people, and becoming a powerful world empire all over again, right? Number 6, the beast springing up from the land refers to the United States of America. We said that the land is where there were not a lot of people, and therefore America was coming out of that, and that is where we are with that regard, right? The 2 horns, which is in the same lamb-like beast and referring to America, represents the Christ-like nature of America, because it started off on religious liberty and civil liberties. That was its 2 founding principles. But not too long after that, it went against those 2 principles by persecuting people, prejudices, that kind of stuff. That continues even to today and will get worse as we move towards the end, right? The mark of the beast, of course, refers to the observance of a religious day of rest and worship that is different from the 7-day Sabbath of the Bible, but it is promoted and enforced by the union of church and state towards the end of time, right? So that hasn't happened as yet, but that is something that we can anticipate based on the predictable and prophecy, that is predictable nature of revelation and the prophecies that are contained there. Number 9, Revelation 13 indicates that, and that should be the Roman Catholic Church led by the papacy, will regain worldwide prominence in the years leading up, because it says the wound was healed. And it talked about the resurgence of the church being in a union with church and state. It says the wound of the beast was healed, meaning that the Roman church, as it came out of tribulation during the French Revolution, its wound was healed. All right, so that is the answer for that one. This is another one where 2 answers will suffice. So I kind of put the screen big and I just pick up everything. True believers of God, the 144,000 represent true believers of God and the Bible who will choose to worship God according to the Bible rather than any other law that mandates otherwise. And then they are the true believers who will be victorious during a very intense period of false worship towards the end of time. All right. So we've covered two quiz. By the way, for some of you who have been with us for a while, I just wanted to know that those 2 quiz were given before. I just moved around some of the options and stuff, but the answers were the same from way back then when we did it. All right, one we did as early as January 2021, and then we did another one somewhere in the middle of the year. So I hope you guys remembered and you got your answers correct. If you didn't, don't tell anybody, all right? All right, so let's resume. This is now the 3rd one and our last one for today. And this one is a bit more contemporary and picking up some of the stuff we've just covered. So this one says, the 7 last plagues occur when? Right, we have to answer that question. During World War I and II? Is that when the 7 last plagues occurred? During the period 538 AD to 1798 AD, is that the 7 last plague period? During the French Revolution, which was a real terrible time, a lot of people were killed and stuff, is that the period of the 7 last plagues? During the investigative judgment, is that when the 7 last plagues will occur? Or do they occur at the end of Jesus's high priestly ministry in heaven? So we need to figure out which one is the correct one in that regard, right? So this one is to choose all that apply, right? During the millennium, what applies? The faithful believers will live with Jesus in the heavenly mansion. That's correct, you need to say. There will be a period of peaceful living on earth. You just tell me if that is correct or not. All faithful beings, including the devil and his angels, will be dead. You tell me if that's correct or not. All unfaithful beings, including the devil and his angels, will be dead. Satan will be planning a battle against God and the leaders of the earth. The faithful will participate in a judgment phase with Jesus. So which one of these questions, these answers, are the correct ones, right? So let's do the third one. Third question is a true or false. The 5th plague will see a withdrawal of support for the church by the people of the earth. The 5th plague will see a withdrawal of support for the church by the people of the earth. Is that true or is that false? All right. Who is referred to as a harlot and her daughters in Revelation 17? Is it Babylon and the nations that follow her? Is it a union of church and state in the last days? Is it the Roman Christian church and other denominations that follow her lead? Is it the devil and his angels? Is it the leaders of the world led by the USA? Who is referred to as a harlot and her daughters in Revelation 17? Number 5, but we'll come back to them anyway. Number 5, which of the following, this one is important, does not occur at the second coming of Jesus in the clouds? The dead in Christ are raised. The devil and his angels are cast into hell's fire. The living faithful are transformed and are caught up with Christ. The faithful who are alive die. The earth becomes desolate. Which of the following does not occur at the second coming of Jesus in the clouds? The dead in Christ are raised. The devil and his angels are cast into the lake of fire. The living faithful are transformed and are caught up with Christ. The unfaithful who are alive die. The earth becomes desolate. All right, so tell me which one of those does not happen. All right, at the Battle of Armageddon, all the true believers of Christ will be executed. True or false? At the Battle of Armageddon, all the true believers of Christ will be executed. True or false? All right. We believe that hell is not a continuous place of fire because, why do we believe that hell is not a continuous place of fire? There will not be enough fuel to keep the fire going. The Old Testament sanctuary would normally, that should be normally, be dismantled when the Jews traveled, so it always came to an end. Eternal life was not promised to those who do not accept Christ in our lives. Since the faithful live eternally, the unfaithful must also suffer eternally. Forever and forever, as used in the Bible, means completed destruction rather than continuous. So you have to tell me why we believe hell is not a continuous place of fire. And again, there may be more than one answer here, right? How many phases to God's judgment are identified in the prophecies of Daniel and the Revelation? So take this one carefully. How many phases to God's judgment are identified in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation? One. Is it one phase only and that is hell? Is it two phases? A millennium and hell itself? Is it three phases? Separation when Christ comes, examination during the millennium and then hell? Or is it four phases? A pre-advent or investigative judgment, a separation of the faithful and the unfaithful when Christ comes, sheep and goat, an examination, it should be an exam as an examination of the choices of the unfaithful during the millennium, and the execution of the final destruction of the devil, his angels, and all unfaithful at the end of the millennium, right? So which of this is correct? Is it of these are correct? Is correct. Is it one, two, three, or four phases of the judgment? Number 9. People will become sick after some time in the new heaven and the new earth. Is that true or is that false? And then number 10. Number 10 says, has three parts. A new heaven and a new earth are created after Christ destroys the devil, his angels, and the unfaithful with fire. Is that true or is that false? 2. A new heaven and a new earth means that a new earth will be created with its own atmospheric heaven. Is that true or is that false? And then the third one, a new heaven and a new earth will be the final home of the faithful after the millennium. Is that true or is that false? I have a confession to make. I forgot to do the slides, or I didn't do the slides with the answers to this. So we'll take the answers now as we go through, right? I will try to write them up on the screen as we go. So the 7 last plagues occur. What is the end of this mark here? The answer is E. At the end of Jesus' high priestly ministry in heaven. What do you write with that? That is when the 7 last plagues occur. What do you write with that? Okay, there are no 2 answers to that one. There is only one correct answer. During the millennium, choose all that will apply. The faithful believers will live with Christ in the heavenly mansion. That's true. During the millennium, there'll be a period of peaceful living on earth. That is not true. There'll be a peaceful period, but there's not be a period of peaceful living because everybody will be dead. Hope you all realize that, right? During the millennium, all unfaithful beings, including the devil and his angels, will be dead. That is also incorrect because the devil will be alive. That is how he's bound, right? During the millennium, Satan will be planning a battle against God with the leaders of the earth. That is also incorrect because that happens at the end of the millennium, not during the millennium. And then the other one, E, the faithful will participate in a judgment phase in Jesus in heaven, and that is true. So answers A and E are true. All right, I hope you all got that correctly. The fifth plague will see a withdrawal of support for the church by the people of the earth. That is false. That will occur in the sixth plague, not the fifth plague. All right. So the fifth plague is about the sun getting hot and burning up the seat of the beast, which we said would be the home of the church itself. And that would lead to the sixth plague, where we'll then talk about the river Euphrates drying up and that kind of thing. So I hope you got that one correct. Number 4, who is referred to as a harlot and her daughters in Revelation 17 when it wasn't Babylon, because Babylon is not referred to here. The union of church and state in the last days, no, that was not referred to here, because the church is what is referred to as a harlot. The Roman Christian church and the other denominations that follow her is the correct answer, which is C. Isn't the devil and his angels? Isn't the leaders of the world led by the USA? That is not referred to as a harlot in Revelation 17. Revelation 17, we talk about a woman who is decked in purple and gold and sitting upon the beast, which is the people of the world, or the world leaders. And that woman is what is called the harlot, and that is referred to as the Christian church and all the other denominations that follow the Christian church. How do they follow the Christian church? Because they observe the first day of the week as the Sabbath, as opposed to what the Bible refers to as the seventh day of the week. Which of the following does not occur at the second coming of Jesus Christ? At the second coming of Jesus Christ, the dead in Christ are raised. The devil and his angels are cast into hell's fire. Is that correct?
No.
No. So this is the correct answer, right? The devil and his angels, they are not cast into hellfire when Christ comes the second time. They are bound because they are alive and they have nobody to kill, to tempt, I mean, right? That happens at the end of the millennium. The living faithful are transformed and caught up with Christ in heaven. That's correct. The unfaithful who are alive die. That's correct. The earth becomes a desolate place. That is correct. That is why the devil is bound up, if you will, during that period, right? The devil and his angels are the ones who are alive. So verse number 6, sorry, question 6. At the battle of Armageddon, all the true believers of Jesus Christ will be executed. That is as false as it gets. Because when it looks as if they are about to destroy God's people, what happens? Christ comes, right? And he bursts the clouds of glory. So that is something to remember as we go forward. Number 7, we believe that hell is not a continuous place of fire, because not that there will not be enough fuel to keep it going. That's not the issue. Not because of the Old Testament sanctuaries have a finite life. Eternal life was not promised to those who do not accept Christ in our lives. God never says whoever does not believe in him will have everlasting life. It says whoever believes in him will have everlasting life, right? And then the number E is also correct, because when we use the term forever and forever in the Bible, it really means, and I have completed here, I really should have just said complete. The D doesn't need to be there. It means complete destruction rather than continuous destruction. So when it says the devil's angels will be destroyed in hellfire forever and ever, it means completely destroyed. And I gave you the example of blowing out a flame from our matches, right? You kind of know that that is out there. So for question 7, it's really C and E. I saw one person is using YouTube and being very transparent with the answers, and I am admire that. So for number 7, you should have also had C as well, right? 8. How many phases of God's judgment are identified in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation? And the answer for that, I hope all of you got that right, is D, which is 4 phases. There's a pre-investigative judgment, a pre-advent judgment, sorry. There is a sheep and goat separation judgment, phase of the judgment, and then there is an examination phase during the millennium, and then there is the final execution or destruction that occurs at the end. And again, I trust all of us got that one correct. And then some people will become sick after some time in the new heaven and the new earth. But that is as false as it gets, because there'll be no more sickness, no more dying, no more pain, no more suffering going forward, right? Then our last question was, a new heaven and a new earth means, are created after Jesus destroyed the devil, his angels, and the unfaithful in fire? True. Means that a new earth will be created with its own atmospheric heaven? True. Will be the final home of the faithful after the millennium? True. All right, so number 10, all questions were true. All right, we're right on time. We did a good bit today. We did a pretty good review. And then we did this quiz, which also forms a basis of a review. So I trust everybody did well and you had good results and that kind of thing. Any questions, anybody? Don't complain about the test, right? Just if you have questions, we take them. All right. And I think we did well today. Next week, we want to close off Revelation chapter 21 and 22. We'll see if we can cover all of that in one go. And if we do, that will bring us to the end of our sessions. If we have to spill over into the next week, we do that. All right? Let's bow our heads to prayer. Father, or someone is asking question 3 in quiz 3. Can I see that again? Sure. I want to make sure you get all your answers correctly, right? So I'm going back to question 3 in quiz 3. The 5th plague. Did I get that wrong or did I get that right? So let's go to Revelation chapter 16. Yes. So the 5th plague is the 5th angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness, and they gored their tongues because of pain. They blasphemed the God of heaven for their pains and did not repent of their deeds. It is in the 6th plague that we get into the river Euphrates drying up, which is really representative of the fact that the people withdrew their support from the church. All right. So that is yes, 1610. So that is the answer for that. Great. All right. Any other questions? Everybody okay? You gotta go back in YouTube and go over them slowly but surely, pause and stop and kind of make sure you get them correct in your head, right? So the quizzes are a form of revision as well. Don't think of only as a way of testing you. It's a good form of revision because the way the questions are written, you could use them to revise the key points as well. Let's bow our heads up prayer. Father, we thank you for your blessing. We believe that you have spoken to us today. And we pray that you will give us the enthusiasm to keep serving you and the sustainability to keep going on despite whatever challenges we face. We long for the day when you will come in the clouds of glory as you reveal these sequence of events. May we continue to be a part of your kingdom and be ready for when you come a second time. This is our prayer in Jesus' most holy name. Amen and amen.